How you doing, everybody? Hope you're having a good day. We've got a lesson today dealing with the fact that a lot of people like to have a religion of convenience. And of course, this is really going to be an examination of how new religions are formed. And so we need to get in that because a lot of times people treat religion like whenever it's convenient, then they'll get busy doing it. So let's get into our lesson here. And we're going to see how these new religions are formed. All right, there's thousands of churches and religions. I mean, we know that. I know there's major religions that many worldwide are involved in. And then, of course, even within the Protestant, what we call the Protestant churches or evangelical churches, there's still over thousands of different divisions of this groups. And so why is that? Why are there so many religions and churches? Why are there so many churches? And basically they all teach different things, but yet somehow they want to justify it by saying, well, we're all going to heaven anyway. And that's not what the Bible teaches. So there's several reasons. See, first of all, for a lot of these people, why do they change is because the original was not appealing to them. And then, of course, many just flat out refuse to follow what they were originally taught. Now, if you were taught a falsehood and changing to the truth, yes, that's good and accomplished, but a lot of people leave the truth so they could practice a lie. And then, of course, whenever you have groups like this, you have leaders and they get a little bit of power and authority and they want more and they seek for more. And they all of a sudden started making rules that they bind upon other people. And there's many reasons why different religions exist. And where we want to focus is the method people use to change people's thoughts on their religion. You hear somebody say, well, I grew up this, but then I changed to that. And what are some of the methods that are used to do this? And what are some of the methods people might use to change people from one element of a particular religion to another element of that particular religion? It's pretty much the same thing. So it's not going to be easy to flip someone from one faith to another. If they're sound in their faith, if they have a strong faith, no, getting them to change is not going to be easy. Hopefully you can touch their heart to look at the truth and see what the truth has to say, and they might consider that. So there's methods are applied that convince the adherent that this new religion is not so bad, and that's what they do. It's just a new way of doing things. Sometimes the leadership decides to have two services. We're going to have a contemporary service and we're going to have a traditional service. And before long, their whole focus is on the contemporary, the changes that are made, and then the people, most of them, they just go along with it. I mean, they may not be comfortable with it, but they still go along with it. Now, how can you faithfully worship God if you're uncomfortable with what the group is doing? I do not know. All right. Bible example of the changing of religion. And we're gonna notice this. See, shortly after King Solomon died, his son Rehoboam caused civil unrest in the land. And many people did not want to follow Rehoboam's rules because they were more restrictive than what Solomon had upon them. And that was a very oppressive government. And in fact, the northern 10 tribes of Israel decided to separate from Judah. And so that's what they did. And they appointed Jeroboam as their own king. Now, as we go along, our story is found in 1 Kings 12, 25 through 33. In verse 26 and 27, and Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will return to the house of David if this people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. Then the heart of this people will return to their Lord, even to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. All right. This leader imagined in his heart that the people would return to their spiritual roots, and the people might even turn on him and kill him. So he was looking out for his own hide. So this required a change to take place. Now, obviously, some changes don't happen right away. It takes a gradual process to get it, and all of a sudden you wake up one day and, hey, when did we change this? And so we see that. But sometimes a dramatic change is sometimes necessary to get people on your side. Okay, so because he wanted to live and he did not want the people going back to their roots, this is why Jeroboam did these things. Verse 28 and 29, so the king consulted and made 2 golden calves, and he said to them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold your gods, O Israel, that brought you up from the land of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. All right, we see that this was not all King Jeroboam's plan. He had his counselors. They got together and they figured out, well, what's it going to take? Well, they knew what the king wanted to do, keep people from going back to Jerusalem. So we invited all these people to put in their input. So he had all these, the staff, the advisors, and things like that. So he consulted with these people. And what we want to know is, who did he consult? Did he consult the priest of God who would tell him what the Lord required? Or would he consult those who wanted to go along with what the king wanted to do? I mean, we do that. See, had he consulted a Levitical priest, he would have been told that the proper place for all Israel to worship was in Jerusalem. That's what God required of them. And had he consulted a scribe, he would have been told that idols were an abomination before God. All right. All right. Obviously, he did not consult someone who spoke the truth. All right. He made golden calves to represent their new gods. And this was wrong on several levels. So, one, going all the way to Jerusalem was too far to travel, and this would be more convenient. You know, a lot of people, it's too far to go to church. We'll just worship at home or something like that. They want that convenience. Or I have to drive past 15 churches to get to my church, so I'm just going to save the gas money and just go to one close to the house. And it doesn't matter if they teach the truth or not. It'd just be more convenient. See, too, there was only one God who was to be worshiped. You know, when God said, thou shalt have no other gods before me, well, here Jeroboam knew that, so he said, he made these golden calves, said, these are your gods. So already the people are turning away from the true God of Israel and going for these false gods. And 3 of the Israelites tried a golden calf before, and that did not work out very well for them. You know, when Moses came down from the mountain, they had built this golden calf, and of course, God did not like that. And 4, the people did not rebel against this departure from God, but they were willing participants. Now, think about that for a minute. Practically everybody knew what God's requirements were, but the king said, no, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it this way. This will be more convenient, and you can worship here, and you don't have to go all the way to Jerusalem. And the people were okay with that, even though they knew what the law required. All right. Verse 30 and 31, now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan, and he made houses on high places and made priests from among all the people who were not of the sons of Levi. All right, their law instructed them to go worship God in Jerusalem 3 times a year. And so Jeroboam changed that. And so he changed the place of worship. All right. Jeroboam also built houses of worship on the high places. And remember, the high places, these were basically a thought and a innovation from the pagans. They went up to their high places. They got up there in the cool mountain air, and it wasn't burning hot. And they'd get little flat areas, and then they would do things on there that really were quite despicable. But anyway, that's why they loved the high places. They could go out and fulfill their their lust of the flesh in these high places. And this was done because the religious neighbors had done this also and worshiped their pagan gods in this fashion. And to be honest, actual worship did not take place in these houses. And that's true. They say he built these houses for worship, but no, what was going on? Well, you've heard of temple prostitutes. Pagans had their prostitutes. So you pay your money, have your lust fulfilled, and then you can go away saying, well, I worshiped a God. All right, that's really didn't happen. So people came to these places to indulge in the sins of the flesh. They weren't going up there like on a high mountaintop into a monastery where they would deny themselves things. No, they went in to indulge in the sins of the flesh. They figured that was a whole lot more fun than having to travel to Jerusalem. Jeroboam also appointed people to be priests that did not have any business being priests. I mean, we know that. See, God had ordained that only Levites could be in the priestly order. And that's the way God set it up. And then only Levites could offer the daily sacrifices. And the high priest had to be a direct descendant of Aaron. But then he changed all that. See, once again, the people were okay with this. They didn't mind. It was a new innovation, but oh well, it's okay as long as our heart's in the right place. That was their thinking. All right. So verse 32 and 33, and Jeroboam instituted a feast in the 8th month on the 15th day of the month, like the feast which is in Judah. And he went up to the altar. Thus he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves which he had made. And he stationed in Bethel the priest of the high places which he had made. Then he went up to the altar which he had made in Bethel on the 15th day in the 8th month, even in the month which he had devised in his own heart. And he instituted a feast for the sons of Israel and went up to the altar to burn incense. So this is where he did this. He did it in his own heart. He did it in his own mind, and he did what he wanted to do because he had done it. And so not only did Jeroboam change the place of worship, but he also changed the time of worship. And they had specific days. I don't remember which ones were which right now, but they had a specific month in which they would go to Jerusalem. And then there were 2 other occasions in specific months on certain days of the year that they would go to Jerusalem to worship God. And God had specified which months the people were to assemble in Jerusalem. And so Jeroboam changed it. Notice the feast. It says the feast was just like the one in Jerusalem. In other words, it had all the same characteristics. They did what they did back there, and it looks like the same kind of religion. So that way people aren't shocked into some other type of reality. But it's so much similar to what they have been doing that, well, this seems to be okay. I can live with this. And so this is one of those subtle features in which change is made to look like something familiar, but yet it is still different. All right, Jeroboam led the services himself to get things started. I mean, he made up these things, he made up these rules and had these calves built, and now he's doing it himself, getting things started. And he made the sacrifice and offered the incense himself, which he had no right to do. And this did not work out very well for Uzziah, who was stricken with leprosy for doing that which only the priests were commanded to do. You know, 2 Chronicles 26, which is, yes, years later after this event of Jeroboam, Uzziah was kind of put off that the priests weren't quite there, so he went into the temple himself to burn incense. And then, of course, because of that, God was angry with him and struck him with leprosy. The most telling phrase in this passage is, which he had devised in his own heart. And that's it. Jeroboam was a man, and he devised these things in his own heart. He didn't listen to God. He did his own thing. So all changing of religion comes from the heart of men. We have to recognize that. God has told us what we're supposed to do in the pages of his Bible. And of course, nowadays we all realize A lot of these religious groups out there, they don't even like the Bible. They don't consult the Bible. They don't follow the Bible. They want to do their own thing. And somehow they want to justify it in their own mind and think that they're okay before God. Well, see, these methods Jeroboam used to create a new religion are still being employed today. All right, see, they kept the worship close enough to satisfy people, but made it different in various ways. And that's how you institute change. You don't do just one great big change. You make subtle changes all along the way until all of a sudden somebody wakes up and says, wait a minute, we're doing this totally different. And by then they become the troublemaker and you can kick them out because they're demanding we go back to the old ways. And so that's what they do. And this practice is introduced by progressive brethren, and by either the members accept it and go along, or they just rebel and move the progressive change agents, or they just leave. That's what happens. That's what happens in a lot of congregations. The leader said, well, we're going to go this direction now. And sometimes the congregation decides to split, and those who want to keep things the way they believe is right, they go on and start a new congregation, and the progressives just keep doing and going worse and worse along their change. And so this doesn't happen as often as it should. Sometimes people really need to take a stand for the truth rather than just tolerate what's going on. And so that's why it doesn't happen often enough. They changed the God we worship. And that's true. While we like saying, well, we worship the God of Israel, we worship the God of creation, we worship the God of the Bible. See, we believe the God of the Bible is a loving God, but also one of justice and punishment for those who reject him and his commandments. Well, these people, they don't want that kind of God, so they change their God. They implement these new standards to change God into what they want him to be. God is tolerant. God will put up with whatever we want to give him. He will accept whatever we want to give him. And he's a God of love, and there's no way he would ever send anyone to a burning hell. I mean, so we hear those things. They change God into what they want him to be. And they also change the rules to suit their own desires. God said, commit to him fully with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. And you don't really have to do that, is what these people are saying. They change the rules to suit their own desires. If they don't like what God says in one area, they just redefine it and say, well, he didn't really mean what he said. He means this. And so it's a new interpretation that they want to give us that somehow for nearly 2,000 years, people have understood it one way. Now all of a sudden, well, we got to look at it this other way now. All right. Remember, God does not change and his word does not change. And they change the object of worship. See, we are commanded to worship the Lord God and only worship him. See, yet many follow Satan and seem to worship something other than God. Yes, we know that. Idolatry, and idolatry comes in many forms. It could be people, it could be money, it could be possessions, it could be things, anything that's more important than God. And if it's your baseball team or football team is more important than God, yes, you have a problem. If your job is more important than God, yeah, you have a problem. And so what you're doing then, you're following Satan. Oh, no, I'd never follow Satan, but you live like you do. Remember in Romans chapter 6, you are the servant of the one whom you serve. All right. Like the golden calves, these are just supposed to be representations of the God to be worshiped. I mean, so, you've seen pictures, people put out statues, they put out pictures, and then they bow down before it. And, well, that's not really Jesus. That's just a representation of what Jesus looked like. Really? That's not the way it's supposed to be. See, this violates the commandment that prohibits images or carvings to be worshipped. Thou shalt not make any graven images. In other words, you don't carve them out of rock or hew them out of would. So, and of course, what do those accomplish? Well, actually, they accomplish nothing. You read throughout the scriptures, Jeremiah made a good point about this, and I think Isaiah did also. He said, "You carve your gods and pray to them, and what do they do for you? They sit on the shelf and they do nothing." And so it's kind of vanity to worship those things. And they change the place of worship. More and more we hear that going to church does not connect you with God anymore. You go out to the lake, you go out in a walking trail, you get out in nature, you go sit in your garden, you sit there in front of your TV if you want to, or you can just stay in bed and connect with God whenever you want to. That's what we keep hearing more and more. And that's why in a lot of places, congregations are shrinking because they've put up with this type of teaching for so long. And so they tell you must get out and experience nature in order to know God. Nature only tells us so much. Nature reveals there is a God, but the Bible is the only place that tells us how we can know God and what God wants from us. So they say stay at home, you can still worship God. That's one of the problems our recent pandemic made everybody stay home. And so we got on the computer and did the Zoom or whatever, electronic Zoom meetings, and people were okay with that. It didn't bother them. And now that they've lifted the stay-at-home orders, guess what? Well, I can stay home and worship God. So, I mean, they're weak individuals to begin with, and that didn't help. And another thing, you don't have to get dressed up and practice some formalized rituals. Okay, maybe it was okay when you sit down there and conduct a service in your bare feet and your shorts, and you don't have to dress up real fancy, and you don't have to go and do those formalized rituals either. All right, and they changed the time of worship. So you're not limited to worship God on Sunday only, and that is true. We should be worshiping God every opportunity we get. But there are elements of the worship assembly that can only be done on Sunday. The Lord's Supper on the first day of the week, and then the giving of our means on the first day of the week. Now, the singing, the praying, and the lessons in the sermon, that can be done anytime. But there are limitations. They tell you can do any act of worship anytime you want, but no, when the Bible specifies on the first day of the week, it eliminates all the others. And so you may do it frequently or every once in a while. It comes to the Lord's Supper. That's what some people say. Well, if you do it every week, it just becomes a ritual and it really doesn't mean anything. If we'll do it once a quarter or once a year, then it'll be more meaningful for us. And so that's a logical reasoning these people are coming up with. And even though the scripture says on the first day of the week, we gather together to break bread. And what do? We remember the Lord's death. Remembering the Lord's death every week is a whole lot better than once a year. You do it more frequently. So, but it's all down to whichever suits you. You can find churches out there that'll do pretty much what you want to do, and maybe you'll even go make some requests. Well, can we start doing this now? And they just might give in if it sounds like fun. See, these methods of changing religion are devised by the minds of men. And that's where they come from. They do not come from God, and they do not have God's approval. The only thing God approves of us is when we do that which is written in his word. So that's why we have to study his word to get his approval. All right, most people just seem to go along with whatever innovations that the leadership comes up with. And it really doesn't bother them if something changes, if things are allowed to go on. If the leadership started to have women preachers, if you weren't used to it, you might be a little uncomfortable with it, but eventually you just go along with it. They introduce the instruments and musical instruments into the worship. for a while, yeah, there was some resistance, but then people just kind of went along with it. They changed the titles of the people from just being a minister to a holy reverend or something like that. Maybe they weren't comfortable at first, but then they just learned to go along with it. So this is why new religions and churches, and a lot of them usually just offshoots from another group, they appear all the time. They're always coming around. And why? Well, they weren't happy with the farmer, so they wanted to try something different, and the other group wasn't willing to try it, so they just started a new religion. And so we recognize all this new religion comes from the mind of man. So what we encourage people to do is return to the original religion of worshiping God the way he taught us. And we learn that, we see the examples of that in the Bible. And so that's what we want people to do. Go to the Bible. Just because something is convenient doesn't mean it is right. And just because it feels good doesn't make it right. And just because a lot of people do it doesn't make it right. And so these lessons we just have to remember. So the question for you is, are you following a religion of convenience for your own convenience, or are you really being honest and worshiping God the way he's taught you to worship him? So consider this lesson. We're going to end the lesson right now. Share this message. If you have questions, be sure and ask. You can send comments. You can send questions. You can send me questions on my Facebook page or my website. Both of those are listed here on the YouTube channel. So I'm going to wish you all a good day, and study God's word and see if these words do not have truth in them. Consider those things. All right. Bye-bye for now.